Take it away.
Yeah, thank you everybody for being here. It's my pleasure tonight to introduce Stephen Goodridge, who has put together an information-packed webinar on what we talk about as the e-bike. Stephen teaches the Traffic Bicycling for Transportation Professionals class each year at the North Carolina Bike Walk Summit, which we hope you all can attend this fall. In his 16 years as a board member of BWNC, Stephen has worked in countless bicycle education and advocacy projects for bicyclists, police officers, and decision makers to help bicyclists get to their destinations safely and enjoyably. And I will say that he does give very generously of his time. We appreciate that. Stephen holds a PhD in electrical engineering and bicycle commutes to a job that is unrelated to bicycle transportation. So that is a passion of his. I will say that I will be watching the chat for questions. Some of them may be asked during the webinar. Some may be asked at the end, depending on the question and if I get to it and where it fits. So thank you again for being here. And with that, Stephen, take it away.
Thank you, Ann, and thanks everybody for being here. Today, I'd like to talk about the science and the history behind the laws for electric assisted bicycles, mopeds, and motorcycles, so you know not just what the laws are, but why they got to be that way. We'll talk about the challenges posed by some of the more powerful types of bikes, and we're going to have some poll questions for all of you so you can give us some feedback on how you feel about these issues and what your concerns are so that we can understand that when we try to advocate for all of you and for bicyclists in North Carolina. We're going to start out with a poll quiz to see what you currently know about this topic, and that'll give us a sense of whether or not this webinar has helped by the end. So we'd like you to participate in our online poll, and I think Terry, you're going to bring that up for everyone. I'm not sure I can see it from here. Oh, I can. So we got 3 questions. We'd like you to go through those on your own so you can scroll through and answer each of them, and then we'll move on from there. I'll give everybody a minute just to look at those. So there's 3 different types of bikes in the poll. We want to see if you can identify them. So I'd like to start out by talking about what's special about bicycles. Why are human-powered bicycles considered to be safe for all ages? And the best explanation I can come up with for that is human-powered bicycles self-enforce limits on sustainable speed based on age and experience. This is my son, Danny. At 10 years old, he could sustain about 10 miles per hour on level ground. At 15 miles per hour, he could sustain about 15 miles per hour on level ground. Your child may vary, but 15 years old is when most kids start getting exposed to driver's ed, start learning about traffic, start getting tutored by their parents. Although I tried to teach my kids earlier than that as we rode together. And then at age 18, my son could maintain about 18 miles per hour. And as an adult, I've never been able to maintain much over 20 miles per hour on a good day on level ground for any length of time. What we want parents to understand is that when you add a motor to a vehicle, suddenly a 10-year-old can travel at the maximum speed capability of that vehicle, whether or not they've developed the knowledge, the experience, and the maturity to do that safely. So that makes bicycles kind of special. The speed of a bicyclist has more of an effect on safety than on many people realize. The faster a bicyclist goes, the more likely they will encounter conflicts ahead of them that pose a serious collision risk, because people may be less likely to notice the bicyclist, or the stopping distance is just so much longer. The stopping braking distance of a bicycle increases in proportion to the square of speed. The stopping braking distance at 30 miles per hour is twice the braking distance at 20 miles per hour. And we see that the Kinetic energy also increases with the square of speed. So you have much greater severity injury at these higher speeds than at lower speeds. Two of the most common intersection type crashes for bicyclists, especially adult bicyclists and motorcyclists, are the left cross and drive out, where the bicyclist is doing everything right, but somebody crosses their path in front of them. There's considerable evidence that these crashes become more likely and more severe for bicyclists as bicycle speed increases. Drivers underestimate the cyclist speed. For motorcyclists, the left cross is the single most deadly type of collision they experience. Knowledgeable motorcyclists and bicyclists can mitigate the danger of their higher speed capabilities through defensive driving techniques taught in motorcycle training and bicycle training classes. So there's been a lot of debate about what is an e-bike, what is not an e-bike. We all know what the E stands for. The disagreement is mostly about what is a bike. Bike is a colloquialism. It means whatever people want it to mean. And so in different contexts, people have different ideas of what a bike is. This is actor Danny Trejo's bike. Mr. Trejo loves bikes. I don't feel like I could walk up to him and say, Mr. Trejo, I'm sorry, you can't call that a bike. That's a motorcycle. You just can't call that a bike. I'd be scared that he would kick me out of his donut shop. I like donuts. I don't want to have that argument with him. So talking about what is or is not a bike, arguing about what is or not an e-bike is meaningless because in North Carolina law, e-bike has no meaning. There is no legal definition for an e-bike in the North Carolina Vehicle Code. There's no definition for an e-bike in the federal product regulations. So if we want to have meaningful conversations about real laws and regulations, we need to use the precise language that is used in those laws and regulations. And that's what we hope to help you with today. So a better question is, what is a bicycle? The word bicycle has a precise legal meaning, and for over a century of history, in court cases and traffic laws, we've defined bicycle operators' rights and duties when traveling on public roads. Since the 1890s, bicycles haven't changed very much in their basic form. Everybody knows what a bicycle is. But in recent years, there's been an effort to expand the definition of a bicycle. And we need to decide as a bicycling community how far we want that expansion to go. Where do we want to draw the line before the word bicycle doesn't mean anything anymore? We want people to know what a bicycle means. So the federal government defines a bicycle in the product regulations for the purpose of regulating. They started out for regulating federally funded paths. This is where this definition first appeared. And that's a two-wheeled vehicle having rear-wheel drive that is solely human-powered. But in 2003, the federal government expanded that to include electric assisted bicycles, which they called low-speed electric bicycles, with a motor up to 750 watts and a speed of less than 20 miles per hour on level ground. Where did this 20 miles per hour limit come from? Why is this important? I want to give you a little bit of history there. So it started out when the federal government and Congress was talking about federally funded paths and what type of electric vehicle, if any, would be allowed on federally funded pedestrian walkways shared with pedestrians. What would be safe? And they decided that a motor vehicle with a top motor powered speed of 20 miles per hour, a bicycle that could go no faster than 20, would be reasonably safe on a shared use path. In 2001, a bipartisan House report looked into regulating low-speed electric bicycles through the Consumer Products Commission instead of the National Highway Traffic Safety Commission. So the Consumer Product Safety Commission already regulated bicycles, and this would expand that to regulate low-speed electric bicycles. And in their report, they argued that these bicycles would not travel faster than that capability of a typical reasonably athletic bicyclist if they're limited to 20 miles per hour. They would help out older and disabled riders who do not have the physical strength to ride up hills without motorized assistance. And they would be typically used in the same manner as human-powered bicycles. They would be harmonious with other bicycle traffic in the places that people ride bikes. And so they also referred back to the regulation on shared use paths and said that a top motor powered speed not in excess of 20 miles per hour could be reasonably safe to consider a bicycle for this purpose, for selling bicycles with electric motors in them. Low-speed electric bicycles were defined for a specific use case, bicycling at typical bicycling speeds in typical bicycling environments, but with less strenuous effort. The motor could provide a little help climbing hills, a little help keeping up with friends and going the distance, a little help with managing child passengers or cargo. But otherwise, these bicycles would blend in harmoniously with other bicycles, and they would be safe around pedestrians. I think we can all think of examples of where this use case has worked really well. Many people who didn't ride before are now riding more and for more purposes. And I think that's wonderful. I think we all really appreciate what this has accomplished. In 2002, Congress enacted the law that formally defined low-speed electric bicycles with a top speed under 20 miles per hour, and they assigned their regulation of their manufacture and sale to the Consumer Product Safety Commission. So these bicycles are not supposed to go faster than 20 miles per hour, under power, and they have to have a motor of less than 750 watts or 1 horsepower. And some of you might look at that 1 horsepower and that 750 watts and think, isn't that awfully powerful if it's supposed to be harmonious with other people, if it's supposed to be equivalent to a human being on a bike, but just giving less strong people a little bit of a boost? And it is. A human being on a good day is around 250 watts sustained, right? So one human power, one Steve power would be 250 watts, and a horsepower is 3 times that. The European regulation for pedelec bikes, which is analogous to this, is 250 watts because it's equivalent to a reasonably athletic human being. Why did we get 750 watts here in the United States? And the answer to that is because the e-bike industry lobbied like heck to get this number. They spent a ton of money lobbying Congress to get 750 watts in there. Because at the time, this was in the middle of 9/11, and Congress didn't want to touch anything to do with bicycles. And so the e-bike industry needed to get really active in this. And so what did they get for their money? What can you do with 750 watts if you're limited to a 20 mile per hour maximum speed? Well, an e-bike rider can now cruise up a 5% grade at 20 miles per hour with 750 watts. With only 250 watts, they'd be moving at about 7 to 8 miles per hour. 20 miles per hour uphill is a lot more fun than going 7 miles per hour uphill. It's more useful, but most importantly, it sells e-bikes. It really sells e-bikes, and that's why they wanted this number. Is this a good thing or a bad thing? I can't pretend to know. It is what it is. In 2016, the North Carolina legislature defined electric assisted bicycle in the VIA code by adopting the same federal definition of low-speed electric bicycle, including the 20 mile per hour maximum and the 750 watt maximum. For this presentation, I'll use the term electric assisted bicycle when I'm talking about North Carolina law, and I'll use the term low-speed electric bicycle when quoting the federal law, but they are essentially the same thing. What is a bicycle? A bicycle is a vehicle. Bicycles and electric assisted bicycles are vehicles, and their riders have the rights and duties of drivers of vehicles. Most of the traffic laws in North Carolina, like traveling on the right half of the road and obeying red lights, apply to all drivers of vehicles, regardless of propulsion mode. Where can bicycles go? Where can they can ride? Bicyclists are allowed on all roadways in the state by state law, except fully controlled access highways. A fully controlled access highway is a freeway or interstate where the adjacent property owners have no legal right of access. They have no driveways. That means that any destination in North Carolina that has a street address or a driveway is on a street that is not a fully controlled access road and therefore legal for bicycling under state law. Fully controlled access highways in North Carolina are, for all practical purposes, redundant to the roads that bicyclists need to get around. But local authorities may prohibit or regulate bicycle use on sidewalks, multi-use paths, and greenways that are used by pedestrians, because these are not roads. And because the state has not defined the rights and duties of bicyclists on pedestrian ways, that can be regulated by local authorities based on what they think is safe and in the interest of the public. Typically, we don't need to use those facilities to go places because all the addresses have street addresses. But sometimes we really want to be able to use those greenways, and we need to be sensitive about laws that would restrict people from using them when it would be reasonably safe. To help everyone understand our current laws regulating different types of motorbikes, I want to walk you through the history of how these vehicles evolved and the emerging issues that the government responded to over time. The very first motorbikes fell into two categories: motor-driven bicycles and motorcycles. To build a motor-driven bicycle, you start with a bicycle and you bolt on an engine, a small engine. To build a motorcycle, you start with a big engine and you build a bike around it. After World War II, an Italian aerospace company entered the motorcycle business by building a motorcycle that would be friendlier to casual users for everyday transportation, especially in cities. Its step-through frame and wide foot platform and fairing to protect the feet and legs from mud would influence vehicles in the future, and we'll get back to that soon. Motor-driven bicycles evolved into mopeds, mostly in overseas markets like Europe. They were designed to be safer and easier for beginners than motorcycles, and to differentiate them from motorcycles, mopeds had to have pedals, limited top speed, and an engine no longer than 50 cubic centimeters, which has a power output of about 1,500 watts, about twice what our low-speed electric bicycles have. They're basically bicycles on steroids. You know, they weren't quite motorcycles, they weren't quite bicycles, they were something in between, but they were very popular in cities in Europe. And when importers first tried to sell them in the United States, the National Highway Traffic Safety Administration threw a fit. They said, no, you can't sell those in the United States for road use unless you certify that they meet our motorcycle safety standards. But mopeds couldn't meet those safety standards. The federal motor vehicle safety standards for motorcycles were designed for things like brake fading from 60 miles per hour. They were designed to a much higher standard than would be reasonable and possible for these moped designs. But eventually, after a lot of haggling, the National Highway Traffic Safety Administration developed moped-specific safety standards. And after those were put into the regulations, you could now purchase a moped for use on roads in the United States. In the 1970s, there was this oil crisis. Some of us may remember. I guess history is repeating, but gasoline got really expensive and mopeds became really popular because they were really economical to use. They were inexpensive to buy. They were easy to park. They were really popular in cities. Anybody could ride one, and everybody did ride one. And unfortunately, they were more dangerous than bicycles. They were safer than motorcycles most of the time, for beginners anyway, but they were more dangerous than bicycles, and there were lots of injuries, especially among kids. And so states responded to this crisis by adopting helmet laws, minimum age laws, and in many cases, driver license and registration requirements. This is a Honda PA50 moped from the 1970s. And I want you to think about how does the typical use case for moped riding differ from the typical use case for bicycling? And how do use cases affect the way products evolve? So we could start by looking at the seat. Does that look like a seat that's designed for efficient and enjoyable pedaling? Or does that look like a seat that's designed for comfortable sitting? Okay. Fortunately, a moped has a throttle, so the only time anyone would pedal this bike was to start the engine. Okay, if you were to pedal this thing for very long, you'd start chafing on your inner thighs because of that wide saddle, And the saddle's really low, so your knees are bent. And what do we know about adjusting a saddle height on a bicycle? You need to have that thing up pretty high so that you have good pedaling efficiency and your legs don't ache. Why would you put the saddle really low on a moped? It's so you can put your feet flat on the ground on either side when you stop, instead of having to get out of the saddle every time you start and stop, which we teach bicyclists to do when we get their saddle to the right height. This inset photo is not a moped. This inset photo is a modern e-bike. It's shaped very similar to a moped from the 1970s because at this point in their evolution, they both have the same use cases and the same influences on their design to reflect those use cases and the regulations that surround those vehicle types. In 1977, there was an international treaty that went into effect that was designed to encourage uniformity and standardization of traffic laws across the world. And one of the things that that treaty included was a definition for a moped. So people could drive mopeds across country borders in Europe, for example. And their definition for a moped said it had to have an internal combustion engine no greater than 50 cc, which is about that 1500-watt threshold, and a maximum design speed not in excess of 30 miles per hour. Notice that there's no pedal requirement. They dropped the pedal requirement for the definition of moped in 1977 from this treaty, and that gradually affected state and country laws around the world, and it affected the moped market. Eventually, by the late 1980s, moped manufacturers stopped providing pedals anymore, and they provided what moped riders really wanted, which was an electric starter and a wide foot platform and a fairing to protect their feet and legs. So by the 2020, we now see that mopeds have adopted that scooter style form factor from the Vespa. And you still have scooter style motorcycles, which are motorcycles, not mopeds. Electric assisted bicycles evolved from motor driven bicycles because electric motors and batteries were much more effective for that use case than an engine. And so now we have three different classes basically of motorized cycle. Anything up to 20 miles per hour and low enough power is considered an electric assisted bicycle. Anything up to 30 miles per hour and low enough power is considered a moped. And anything faster or more powerful is some type of motorcycle. The state vehicle code defines this very clearly. An electric assisted bicycle can go up to 20 miles per hour. A moped can go up to 30 miles per hour with limited power. And a motorcycle is anything faster or more powerful than those. For operation of these vehicles in North Carolina law, riding a motorcycle requires you to have a driver's license with a motorcycle endorsement, a DOT helmet, registration, and liability insurance. If you want to drive a moped, you need to be at least 16 years old, you need to wear a helmet, and you need a registration and liability insurance. To ride an electric assisted bicycle, you need a bicycle helmet under law if you're under 16, but we recommend everybody wear one. That's operation of vehicles. Manufacture, import, and sale of vehicles is regulated by federal law. And it's divided in a couple different categories for regulation, depending on whether it's intended for use on public roads or intended for off-road use only, and if it's faster than 20 miles per hour under power or slower than 20 miles per hour. If it's designed for use on public roads and it can go faster than 20 miles per hour under motor power, it is regulated by the National Highway Traffic Safety Administration. It's considered a motor vehicle, and in order to get a vehicle identification number for registration, the manufacturer needs to self-certify that it meets the federal motor vehicle safety standards for that class of vehicle. Now, if it's designed for and intended only for off-road use, and the manufacturer says this is not intended for on-road use, this is for off-road use, then it classifies as an off-highway vehicle and is regulated by the Consumer Product Safety Commission. It's not considered a road vehicle. It doesn't have to have lights. It doesn't have to have mirrors and all that other stuff for use on roads. If it goes less than 20 miles per hour under motor power, it can be a low-speed electric bicycle, and it is also regulated by the Consumer Product Safety Commission. The Consumer Product Safety Commission does a pretty good job of making sure that batteries don't blow up. I mean, they try, they're not perfect, but that's what their mission is, to make sure that handlebars don't snap in half, but they don't know much about traffic. That's not their purview. If you're talking about traffic safety, that's the National Highway Traffic Safety Administration. There are a couple of ways that we can take these off-road. There are a couple of ways that e-bikes can become unlawful for use on public roads. One way is to take a low-speed electric vehicle, a low-speed electric bicycle, and modify the software so that it can go faster than 20 miles per hour. Modern brushless electric motors are controlled by software. And by changing that software, you can change its maximum speed. A lot of e-bike manufacturers tell their customers exactly how to modify the settings on the bike to make it go faster than its factory configuration of 20 miles per hour. Sometimes they do this explicitly, and sometimes they just leak the instructions to social media influencers. And it's in the e-bike manufacturer's interest to do this because when people know that they can mod the bike to go faster, that bike becomes more popular for selling to the kids. The kids, they want to find out which bikes that they can mod to go fast. The other way that vehicles become used unlawfully on the roadways is when people take off-highway vehicles and operate them on the road. This bike I'm showing here is a Suron electric dirt bike. It's the most popular brand of electric dirt bike in the world, and it's the most popular because it's a really good dirt bike. Okay, my friends rode dirt bikes as kids. I wish I had a dirt bike like this. This thing it's awesome in my opinion. But you can buy a pedal kit from a third-party manufacturer to put pedals on this dirt bike. Does that make it a better dirt bike? Absolutely not. It doesn't make it a better dirt bike. The only reason anybody puts pedals on a dirt bike like this is to be able to ride it on the road and make it disguised as a bicycle. Kids have discovered that if you put pedals on a motorcycle or on a moped or whatever you want to call it, as long as it has pedals, police aren't sure if it's not a bicycle. You can say, oh, it's an e-bike, and as long as you're making a convincing show of it, the police will leave you alone. We need to ask
Stephen.
her, yes.
Oh, I'm sorry. We do have a question. And the question from Noah is, are mods to e-bikes illegal by state or by federal law?
In North Carolina, it's not illegal. In federal law, it's not illegal. But if you operate it on the roadway, so it's not illegal to modify something, but if you operate it on the roadway, you may no longer be in compliance with state law. So you can modify your e-bike and go ride it in your backyard, right? But it's when you ride it on the roadway, it's no longer in compliance with the state law as the definition of electric assisted bicycle. You've made something else.
Follow-up question on that. You mentioned these being off-road vehicles. Um, what is off-road? Are they legal can you use them on greenways, multi-use paths and things like that that aren't considered roads?
That's a good question. That would be up to the locality because that's not the state law doesn't extend to those places. You can use them on private property. You can use them in state parks where they allow off-road vehicles. But whether or not a municipality wants to allow that is up to the municipality. So we need to ask ourselves, do we want these things to be considered bicycles? Is it absurd to call these bicycles? And if we don't want that, then how can people know that these aren't bicycles? What would be a standard that we could apply so that people would know these are not bicycles? Some of you may wonder, well, what about Class 3 e-bikes? He hasn't talked about that yet. Uh, Class 3 e-bike is an e-bike industry term for a 750 watt, 28 mile per hour pedal assisted bike. It's an industry term. It has no meaning under North Carolina law currently. The National Highway Traffic Safety Administration draws a hard line at 20 miles per hour. They consider anything that can go faster than 20 miles per hour on the roadway to be under their purview, and they want it to comply with regulations for some type of motor vehicle class. Meanwhile, the e-bike industry has lobbied states to get these 28 mile per hour pedal assisted bikes defined as bicycles. 36 states in the United States currently consider these class 3, e-bikes as a defined type, but not North Carolina. North Carolina has no concept of a Class 3 e-bike. They just have the 20 mile per hour maximum electric assisted bicycle. Most states that do recognize Class 3 bikes as a special type of electric assisted bicycle, uh, they restrict them from greenways and multi-use paths, and they require riders to be 16 or older. In 2021, the industry persuaded Congress to authorize 28 mile per hour Class 3 e-bikes on federally funded non-motorized trails. However, this regulation does not prohibit local authorities from deciding we don't want that type of vehicle on the trail. They just needed to increase their ceiling so that local authorities could, if they wanted to, allow these 28 mile per hour e-bikes on those trails. Class 3 bikes are not anybody's biggest problem right now. Um, Last year, there was a really great study sponsored by the California legislature, commissioned by them, that was published by the Mineta Transportation Institute. Anybody who cares about this topic and wants to get into the science of it, really, I recommend this study. This report was great. It compiled a whole bunch of other reports on this topic. And what they wanted to do is look at, one of the things they looked at was, what are people actually riding? What are the kids riding to school in California? So a bunch of researchers went to a bunch of different California middle schools and high schools, and they wanted to see what are the kids riding, and they counted up the different types of e-bikes and tried to determine, are they class one, are they class two, class three, or something faster? Are they more powerful? And what they found was that 88% of these were higher power and faster than the three class system allowed. They were either over 20 miles per hour with a throttle, or they were over 750 watts, or some combination of these things. Some of these things go 30, 40 miles per hour. And that's what the kids are riding to school right now. And also in this report, they talked about some market research that showed that devices with motors above 750 watts is now the fastest growing segment of the electric bicycle market. So what we're seeing right now is the electric assisted bicycle market is segmenting. Uh, there are lots of great 20 mile per hour and under electric assisted bicycles out there, but there's this new segment of faster bikes that kind of want to be mopeds. They go faster than 20 miles per hour. They serve a very similar use case to mopeds. And lots of times they look like mopeds because they try to satisfy a similar use case. These things are popular. This is a sampling of 1500 watt and faster e-bikes that you can buy that go 28 miles per hour or faster. You can order online and have them delivered to your door within a week. They look like fun. I don't have anything against the concept of these things. I don't want anybody to think that I'm down on high-powered vehicles. I think that as I'm an electrical engineer, I'm really excited about the electrification of personal mobility. But we have to question, where is this market going and how are people using these legally on the roadway? If I go to Amazon and I do type in the search bar 28 mile per hour e-bike, this is what I get for results. Long list of these different bikes. Up at the top, I've got this TST electric bike for adults, 1500 watt peak motor. So 1500 watts right there. This is not a low-speed electric bicycle, right? This is not an electric assisted bicycle under state law. I can't use this on the roadway as a bicycle. So is this an off-highway vehicle or is this a moped? I'm not sure, but Amazon wouldn't sell it to me if it was illegal for me to ride, right? They wouldn't do that. I mean, it says right here in the product description, urban commuting with ease. I like that. I want urban commuting with ease. So let me take my money, please. Send this to me. I'll get this in a couple of days. I get it home, all right? And some killjoy tells me that's not an electric assisted bicycle. That's a moped. You need to register it as a moped. I'm like, really? Well, I'm a goody two shoes, so I want to do the right thing. So how can I register this thing as a moped in North Carolina? All right. The first thing I need is a vehicle identification number. All right. So I look at the bike, and if it's a motorcycle or a moped, it should have a VIN number stamped into the frame up at the front, along with a certificate of compliance with the Federal Motor Vehicle Safety Standards for that vehicle type. And so I look around, and on this bike that I got from Amazon, I'm not going to find that because those manufacturers do not certify their vehicles for roadway use. So I have no VIN number. And that's the end of the story. There is no practical way for me as a consumer to get a VIN number for registering my vehicle if the manufacturer did not certify it for roadway use. If I did have a VIN number, then I could get my paperwork together and I could get moped liability insurance for it. And I could take my $25 registration fee to the DMV with my ID and I could get a plate for it. But I don't have a VIN number, so I can't do any of this. What can I do?
Stephen,
Yes.
yeah. The question is probably a segue to what you're going to say next, which is um, if that's the case, where should a 28 mile per hour bike be ridden? Assuming somebody has a 28 mile an hour bike already, not having known that this was an
Right.
issue.
I have a huge amount of empathy for people who are in this situation. Okay. I think we all should because they've been deceived. Okay. So, what am I going to do? I'm a human being. Okay. I'm a flawed human being who wants to do the right thing, but I'm blocked from doing the right thing here. So, what I can do is I can go to eBay and buy a really convincing looking e-bike sticker that says it's a class 3 or class 2 or whatever class I want in whatever color I want, whatever size I want. I can buy one of these stickers, slap it on my bike, and pedal performatively whenever I see a cop. What do you think the kids are doing? Doing exactly that. They're not registering these as mopeds because they can't. Is this what we want? Is this the system we want? Do we want a marketplace that openly sells products that consumers can't use for their advertised purpose without circumventing the law? Okay. I don't blame consumers for this problem. Okay. Again, I'm an electrical engineer. I love the electrification of personal mobility. These bikes, they're super efficient. They're zero emissions. They're lightweight. They're easy to park, easy to store. You can put them on a bike rack, on a heavy bike rack on the back of your car or truck. You can bring them inside. You wouldn't do that with a gas moped, right? They're fascinating vehicles, all right? But we've got a problem because the way people want to use them doesn't match what our current legal system allows. So, what do we think the answer is? Do we think the answer is to try to ban sales of these very popular products? This is America. That's not how we roll, right? Okay. Do we think the answer to is to expand the bicycle definition to higher speed bikes? Do we want these to be bicycles? Does that devalue what a bicycle is? Is it become nonsensical? Okay. Or should we adapt our motor vehicle regulations to develop a viable path to legal use that also promotes safety? Do we need these things to be regulated by a branch of the government that understands traffic instead of the Consumer Product Safety Commission? Okay, I'm asking provocative questions because I think that's what everybody listening to this needs to think about, come up with their own answers, and use their opinions to try to influence our elected officials.
Stephen,
Yes.
yeah, I'll just mention there's been a few comments from attendees saying things like my class 3 e-bike was marketed by Trek for commuters, or it's not just kids who are riding these things. We have a new trail, rail to trail, and so many of these are ridden by adults. So it kind of goes along with what you're saying, but that's a topic of interest, seems to be a topic of interest here.
Yeah, I think that folks in the class 3 who bought a class 3 bike, I mean, first of all, they like to pedal, right? Class 3 e-bikes are designed for pedaling, and I think a lot of us as bicyclists completely identify with that. And visually, they're usually indistinguishable from class 1 e-bikes, okay, pedal assist. You only notice the difference when you get up to speed. And so, I'm not the current law makes that a difficult situation, but I don't think we've seen a lot of crackdown on class 3 e-bikes. What we're seeing the most concern about is these higher powered bikes that really fit more into the moped use case, ridden by people who are really not that excited about pedaling. They just want to go somewhere fast. And
That's
that's the
also
difference.
It's also a behavior issue too, right? So if you ride your class three e-bike on a greenway 20 miles an hour or less, um, assuming that's the regulation there, then probably nobody's going to say anything or worry about you, right? It's going to look just
Yeah.
like a class two.
Yeah,
Yep.
a mature adult can do the right thing with a class 3 e-bike, okay? So in Cary, North Carolina here, our greenway speed limit is 15 miles per hour. In Raleigh, it's 10 miles per hour. And that law went into effect 25 years ago when a kid on a mountain bike ran over this little old lady and she got seriously injured on a greenway. So they reacted to that, dropped the speed limit in Raleigh to 10 miles per hour, and have never raised it in all this time. Um, so, if you're act responsibly, you're not going to have a problem. But what we ultimately want to do is get our laws to comply with the way prudent people are behaving. So yeah, these are higher powered bikes. They're basically mopeds. We need to figure out how to allow them to be used on our roadways and how a proper regulatory framework for them. Um, Bike Walk NC has an official position on this topic that is very narrowly defined because we want to allow for some regulation outside of what we think is really important, which is we believe that the operation of lower speed electric assisted bicycles that fit North Carolina's existing legal definition is already covered adequately by the existing traffic laws that also govern the operation of conventional bicycles. We're really concerned that any changes to or new regulations of higher speed electric motorized cycles should not purposely or inadvertently create obstacles to the use of conventional bicycles or low speed electric assisted bicycles fitting the legal definition. So we don't want, a backlash against e-motos to hurt people that are riding regular bicycles and truly low speed electric assisted bicycles. We also believe that education and user behavior can play a large role in addressing the safety concerns, and we're looking for partnerships to expand education of bicyclists, drivers, uh, on safety skills. We have a couple of programs where I'm going to talk about in a moment that might be helpful here. There is federal regulation out there right now. Is a bill up for consideration, HR 7839. It directs the CPSC to develop a classification and labeling standard for e-bikes that would be on every bike, labeling it as either a low-speed electric bicycle or an off-highway vehicle. This would kind of help consumers a little bit. At least they'd know what they got once they bought it. It would require a permanent, clearly visible, and consistently placed label identifying its characteristics, and it would prohibit labeling off-highway vehicles and non-compliant bikes as low-speed electric bicycles. So if a manufacturer put a sticker on there that was a lie, that would be illegal. And it would also prohibit enabling modification of the speed and power limits. So at least the manufacturers wouldn't be allowed to make it easy to change the speed of the motor and increase the top speed of the bike. But what we don't know is how permanent these labels are really going to be, how resistant to tampering and counterfeiting they'd really be. And it also doesn't really address the strong demand for high-powered vehicles and the use case of driving them on roadways. So I think it misses some of the issues that are going to be a concern going in the future. So while we're waiting for better, more sensible regulations that match the way people actually want to operate these things responsibly, uh, how do we address the user behaviors that are creating the biggest problems? And when we look at who's getting hurt, what stands out right away is the age 10 to 15 group. Kids in this age range, 10 to 15, are becoming more independent. They're traveling longer distances from home, often on busier roads, and they think these bikes are cool. because they are cool, right? But they don't have the benefit of the knowledge of driver education and driving experience at this age. Okay, in most cases, they're just starting to understand how traffic works and they're getting hurt. How are they getting hurt? What kinds of mistakes are they making that we need to address? Um, if we look at crash data from North Carolina for the 10 to 15 age range for just regular bikes, we get a sense of what kinds of mistakes they're prone to making. And better operating habits can prevent most of their crashes. When we look at them, we see most of the crashes by this age group are called bicyclist ride out, where the bicyclist is riding out in front of other traffic where they're supposed to yield. Most of these are kids blowing stop signs. Most of these are kids blowing stop signs, running red lights, sometimes riding out from driveways. Next, you've got motorist overtaking. Most of the motorist overtaking crashes for this age group are kids riding at night without lights. You've got a bunch of bicycling turn errors where they just don't know how to turn properly at intersections. And you've got a lot of head-on and motorist drive-out crashes that are mostly kids riding against traffic. These are all really basic, fundamental things that we teach in basic traffic negotiation skill development, right? This is driver's ed 101. So this is low-hanging fruit that I think that we can make a big difference with education. Unfortunately, in the United States, bicycle education is voluntary, unlike a lot of Europe where it's mandatory. And so kids self-select or parents self-select their kids for this education. There are some resources, though, out there in North Carolina and elsewhere that can be helpful. So NCDOT developed the Let's Go NC Child Bicycle Safety Curriculum for school systems to use. Unfortunately, most schools are cash strapped and strapped for time, and so it's not taught in many places. And it also stops at the fifth grade. We really want something that extends beyond fifth grade to really hit that, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15 age group because they're really getting into these bikes at that age. Bike Walk NC developed the Bicycle Safety Quiz, which uses knowledge challenges to teach best practices. And we have different versions for different groups, different age ranges, and we just developed a middle school version that we think will help. And we encourage people to check that out. Uh, NCDOT a long time ago developed the Streetwise Cycling Booklet, which was basically a bicycle driver's manual for North Carolina. It's dated and out of print, but the concept is good. More recently, NCDOT, working with Bike Walk NC, developed the Motorists and Bicyclists Best Practices for Road Safety Reference Guide, which is a reference for transportation professionals, safety professionals, advocates who want a go-to source for best practices that they know have been approved by NCDOT and advanced for putting into their safety literature. So I think this is a good source if you want to turn something around quickly that teaches people best practices, gives advice, and you don't want to get in trouble for saying the wrong thing. You don't want to get in trouble with NCDOT. This has been vetted and is available for converting into smaller, more targeted communications. And you can find a lot of these resources on the NCDOT webpage here. And we encourage you to check those out. My favorite training resources on this topic is developed by the American Bicycle for Education Association, of which I am a contributing member. I'm a donating member. TeenEBikeTraining.com. I really recommend people check this out if you care about education on this topic. This is developed by the same people who developed the Cycling Savvy bicyclist education program, of which I'm certified to teach. It just sets the standard for education. And I'd love to see communities signing up to get people taking this class, maybe sponsoring students, finding a way to pay for this. This is not paid for by the government. This is a nonprofit organization, and so it is right now. It's for most of the class is for a fee, right? It's a paid training course, but I'd love to see people get interested in figuring out how to sponsor this and spread it. Finally, enforcement, right? Education needs to come before enforcement because it's really hard to enforce the law when people don't know what the law is. but law enforcement is very appropriate when moving violations may endanger the public. We've seen lots of reports of in newsworthy stories. You know, the media loves to share this stuff of groups of e-bike and e-motor riders riding together. And oftentimes the story in the media goes, you know, mob of e-bikers slow traffic. And the comments on those stories are the police need to round all those people up and then crush their bikes. And this is not really an effective way to respond. Based on similar experience that we've had with disorganized group bicycle rides like critical mass, bicyclist educators and safety advocates recommend that police focus on specific traffic violations by individuals, not the traffic volume of the group, right? So violations, not volume, okay? Don't infer culpability just based on association, okay? Simply riding together and temporarily slowing traffic isn't illegal and isn't dangerous. What's illegal and dangerous is riding left of center, swerving at cars, doing stunts in dense traffic, blowing through traffic signals, failure to yield. So, focusing on the specific moving violations that are a problem allow you to address safety without violating people's constitutional rights. So, wrapping up, we've examined how North Carolina's existing regulatory framework recognizes electric assisted bicycles, mopeds, and motorcycles as legal road vehicles, plus off-highway vehicles prohibited from use on public roads. This is the vocabulary we need to use when describing what we can do where. We found that adding electric to bicycle has created a bit of a regulation loophole through which lots of manufacturers are trying to drive everything. And they try to do that by putting pedals on all kinds of motorized contraptions, hoping to pass them off as bicycles so people can ride them on the road. And this is being a problem. There is strong consumer demand for lightweight, inexpensive, environmentally friendly mopeds. And this consumer demand is not going to go away. We need to come up with a way to deal with it. And so we need to ask ourselves, you know, we need to do a lot of analysis to figure out, should we expand the definition of bicycle, expand the regulatory framework for mopeds, or create some new vehicle classification in between? I'm not going to give you the answer to this. That's not my job. I'm trying to get you guys to ask the right questions of yourselves. Think about this because this is sort of where we're headed. And lastly, kids are getting in over their heads. We need to do a much better job of education so these kids know how the traffic works so they can make smarter decisions and they can be safe. And we need parents to understand that accelerating a vehicle with a motor can short circuit that developmental process and cause problems. So we're going to have a little bit of Q&A, and we also have some poll questions after this that we wrote. We want to get your feedback on this presentation and on this topic, but we can open up for some Q&A now.
Yes, we have quite a few questions. I'm going to try to group some together. Jeff had a question about contributory negligence and what recommendations you would give someone considering a class 3 e-bike. And similarly, Tom asked or stated that he's worried about legal exposure if he has a collision on his class 3 e-bike. So can you address those?
Yeah, well, here I've got the lawyer asking the non-lawyer
Well,
questions about contributor. This is the expert asking the fool
true,
here.
I could answer that too.
And I will let you do that, Ann. And so I'll point it back to you. I remember there being a court case you once worked where the courts found that if the bicyclist's violation had no actual consequence on the cause of the crash, then it wasn't really contributory negligence.
Right.
Okay, so if you happen to be operating the same thing, if you happen to be operating the wrong thing or the wrong way, but that mistake has absolutely no basis for the cause of the crash, then that helps insulate you from contributory negligence. But I know you can do a much better job of that, Anne.
No, that was really well said. Yeah, and with the case of a class three e-bike, I mean, there is the potential that the nature of the bike could be the cause of the collision. Just depends. That's something it's up for a jury to decide generally, and so all the facts would be presented, and it is a consideration depending on how the crash happens. But if you get hit from behind or something like that, then obviously it's well, I should never say obviously, but most likely it's not going to be contributory negligence, or the
Right.
contributory negligence is not going to affect any result.
And we know it's not a perfect world. Respectability politics works a lot into how juries look at people. And so if you're, trying to do the right thing and it happens to be a class three e-bike, but you've been following all the rules of the road and something happens to you, I think, juries will look more favorably on you than if you look like you're trying to flout the law.
Right. Exactly. So yeah, we had another question, and just mentioning too in the chat here that we're staying on a little bit longer to answer questions. But there's another question about um, the what is the meaning of the speed threshold for pedal assist bikes? For example, I can ride 20 miles an hour without assist, but with assist, my speed would be much greater. So is the 20 miles an hour based on not pedaling?
That's a good question. At the time that uh, the legislature first wrote that language, um, I don't think they were probably very familiar with how computer-controlled motors work. They may have had a very analog understanding of how motors work. Um, but most of the lawyers I've heard from say that if the legislature intended for there to be a higher speed threshold for pedal assist than for throttle, then they would have stated that. They would have provided a number for how fast the bike could go under pedal assist versus just throttle. And they didn't. And so everybody I've read says that really the intention was pretty clear based on the history and what people have written about this was that you weren't supposed to go faster than a typical physically fit bicyclist could go without motor power, which is about 20 miles per hour on level ground sustained.
Thanks. Couple questions from people who were maybe concerned about the safety of e-bikes from a pedestrian standard. So one individual, so Mark asks, as a disabled individual, are there conversations concerning the multimodal mouthful at this point of the night, multimodal use on sidewalks to protect pedestrians from collisions, particularly vision impaired individuals? And then Virginia mentions that she's concerned about the weight of these vehicles and getting hit as a pedestrian.
Yeah, it's already a problem with just bicycles, right? We do see that bicyclists on sidewalks can hurt people. Um, and so you add the power and weight of the e-bike to that, and it's a big concern. And that's going to be up to individual municipalities to decide because they do have jurisdiction over their sidewalks and their multi-use paths. They can do anything they want with those. But what Bike Walk NC is concerned about is do our regulations for the bigger and heavier bikes affect people riding the ones that are already legal as class one, as low speed electric bicycles? Now, some of those are pretty heavy, right? Some of them are 20 miles per hour on some of those class one bikes is still pretty serious. So I have a lot of empathy there. And that's kind of why we don't want this to be a moving target. We don't want to keep adding more and more speed and bigger, more powerful bikes to the definition of bicycle because that doesn't mean anything. We want to decide where can bicycles and pedestrians share a path and where shouldn't they?
Okay, great. Thank you. And then a couple of people asked about scooters, meaning I'm assuming the ones that you can pick up on the side of the road and start with an app, and
Mhm.
whether there are similar rules for those. And I don't know if that's something that you're prepared to address, but throw that out there.
Well, yeah, I've been thinking about them for a long time because North
Mhm.
Carolina never defined what those are under state law. And so municipalities are left to try to figure out what vehicle classification do they belong to. And one possible reading of the law is that those are mopeds because they're motorized and they're not bicycles, right? And they don't go over 30 miles per hour, um, but they're motorized and they're not bicycles. And what's left? It's the moped category. But municipalities have decided to ignore what this ambiguity and just try to regulate them on their own, and the state hasn't stopped them from doing that. So it's kind of the Wild West, and I don't have an answer for that.
Um, let's see. A couple questions that just came in. Well, let's see. Virginia mentioned that she likes the point regarding regulations impacting regular bikes. Oh, I see. She mentions we already have a culture in Western North Carolina that is quite unfriendly to bicyclists. So agrees that we don't want to see any changes that affect I guess, analog bicycles using the roadway, which is a point that you made. Um, we had, let's see. I guess I'll just end with I'll say that if we missed your question, if you asked a question and we missed it, I think I got them all. Um, but if we missed it, to please feel free to reach out to someone at Bike Walk and see. We should be able to point you in the right direction. I will end with a comment by Connie, came pretty early on, that all of this, what you're talking about, is an indication of the demand. Americans are desperate for non-car mobility options.
Hmm. Yeah,
Uh,
absolutely.
yes. And I just got one more comment. A few people asked, a few people mentioned they were students in transportation engineering and are interested in roadway design accommodations for bicycle users. And, would you have any suggestions about careers in this area? And I guess a similar question would be along the lines of, what are some things transportation engineers consider regarding accommodating e-bikes?
Yeah, so what's the first thing that traffic engineers talk about when they're designing roads? They talk about the design speed of the road, right? They often start with the design speed before anything else. They like assume, oh, this is this class of a road, and so it has to go have a design speed of 35 miles per hour, or 50 miles per hour. Um, and sometimes that's a little bit blind because they're not thinking about the surrounding road use, the land use around the road. But there is a scientific process to it. They're thinking about the physics of the vehicles and the sight distances that people are going to need to use, um, and what makes it safe to go a particular speed. That science scales down to bicycle speeds. You can use the same kind of science to figure out, is a particular path going to be safe at a particular speed? And you can also work it around the other way and say, if I want to keep people below a certain speed, what are the things I need to do to try to encourage lower speeds? So we're seeing that go both directions with motor vehicles. Is we got really good at designing roads for people to go fast on. Now we need to figure out how to be good at getting people to slow down. And the same problems are going to occur at a different scale with e-bikes because sometimes you want them to be able to go fast because they want to go all the way across town. So what kind of path or bike lane do you design for riding across town versus if they're going to go through a commercial district, how do we get the e-bikes to slow down? Just like we want the cars to slow down. So the science scales. And so look for opportunities to learn the physics and the theory and then apply it to different scales.
That's great. Thank you so much, everyone, for being here, and Stephen for this really, really informative presentation. I believe those are all the questions that we got.
Thank you very much. It was a privilege. Does Terry want to say goodbye?
Thanks everybody for joining tonight. We're going to hang online here just a few
Okay.
more minutes, or we're going to end our live stream. But thank you very much, Stephen. Thank you very much, Ann, and thank you everybody for participating.
Thank you.
Someone said that they had trouble, that they weren't able to see the poll.